Good evening. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Gregory Abowd, tonight's speaker and the recipient of this year's Association for Computing Machinery SIG-Chi Lifetime Research Award. I'm here as a representative of Gregory's extensive academic family. Much of my introduction is going to focus on family and the importance of it in Gregory's career. Many of you already know Gregory, or at least know of him, as he's accomplished so much and contributed so much to the fields of human-computer interaction and ubiquitous computing. He received his bachelor's degree in math from Notre University and his master's and doctor of philosophy from Oxford University, his DPhil from Oxford University in computation, where he was a Rhodes Scholar and specialized in software engineering. After a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon and research scientist position at Carnegie Mellon, he joined the faculty at Georgia Tech, where he stayed for 27 years, being named a Regents Professor, holding an endowed chair position, and serving as an associate dean in the College of Computing. 2 years ago, he left Georgia Tech and joined you all in Boston as he became a professor and dean at the College of Engineering at Northeastern University. Gregory has received numerous awards for his impactful work, including the SIG-Chi Social Impact Award and the ACM Eugene Lawler Humanitarian Award for his work on applying computing to people with autism. He is a member of the Chi Academy and an ACM Fellow. He's received a number of Best Paper Awards and multiple Test of Time Awards. He's the world's leading scholar in the invention and application of ubiquitous computing technologies. His research has defined the field of ubiquitous computing for the past 30 years, starting with context-aware computing and the automated capture and access of live experiences, to instrumented smart homes, to using built infrastructure to sense activities in a space, to the creation of novel materials that are both self-sustaining and computational. He has applied his unique and novel inventions to education, issues impacting people who care for and live with autism, to health broadly, and most recently, sustainability at scale. Gregory has also been an incredible community builder, both in the large and in the small. Outside of his research group, he has created multiple communities. He co-authored the first textbook on human-computer interaction, and he was the general chair of the first conference on ubiquitous computing, UBCOM. He was on the founding editorial board for the IEEE Pervasive Computing magazine. He was the founding editor-in-chief for the Foundations in Trends and HCI Journal, and the proceedings of the ACM in interactive, mobile, wearable, and ubiquitous technologies. He served as the founding president and board chair for the Atlanta Autism Consortium for almost 15 years. Now, all of these things you could find out yourself if you Googled him or just asked ChatGPT. But what I want to do in this introduction is tell you about Gregory, the individual behind this amazing research career. Gregory is all about family. He has an incredibly supportive family, many of whom I think are on this call. His wife, Megan, sons, Aiden and Blaze, and daughter, Mary Catherine. Gregory would be the first to say that he wouldn't be so accomplished without his family, who not only support him, but also help to focus and inspire his impactful research. He comes from a really big family, being one of 12 brothers and sisters. They pushed and supported him as well, and also serve as an incredible source of inspiration and collaboration. And he spends a lot of time with them and their families. And then there is Gregory's academic family, which is much bigger. He's graduated 35 PhD students and currently has another 4 PhD students. If you consider his PhD students as his academic children, then he has children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I don't actually know, Gregory, if you have any great-grandchildren, but I know it's only a matter of time. In his academic family, he has 187 PhDs and postdocs that descend from him. And including current PhD students, his academic family totals 343. I was lucky enough to be Gregory's second PhD student and his first in human-computer interaction and ubiquitous computing. I've known him for almost 30 years, and I can easily say that no one has had a bigger influence on my career than Gregory. I remember one particular conversation with him 27 years ago. I ran into him in the hallway of our building. I had already dropped out of a PhD in aerospace engineering at that time and was thinking about dropping out of my PhD in computer science. He asked me what I was passionate about and what I wanted to work on. He took a really active interest in me and my career. By the end of this very serendipitous conversation, he asked if I wanted to work with him on my PhD. I asked him what his area was, and he said human-computer interaction. I told him that I didn't think that was a real field, and he just laughed. I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. He was my third and fortunately final PhD advisor. And I'm not alone. If you look across his PhD students, all of them can point to similar experiences with Gregory. He was and continues to be an amazing mentor. He is still the first person I call when I need advice. It's through Gregory that I met my wife, his third PhD student. He and his wife adopted me into their family, and not just me, but my parents too. He was there at my engagement, he spoke at my wedding, and has officiated or spoken at the wedding of many of his PhD students. Gregory wasn't just our PhD advisor, he was our friend, our confidant, our role model, and our family. 30 years later, and I still reach out to him for advice on major decisions. And I know others in the academic family reach out as well. Being part of the Abowd academic family, you gain a whole lot of people that you share a common bond with that you can turn to for advice. We share students with each other, we compete for students, we write grants together, we publish together, we really rely on each other. Gregory, you've given us so much as individuals, but probably your greatest gift to us as a whole is this academic family, many of whom I consider to be my actual family. Gregory has a great way of bringing out the best of people he works with, students and faculty alike. He has served as a role model about how to integrate work and life and how to follow your passions. He has demonstrated a path for working on impactful problems that improve the lives of others long before this was the norm in the HCI community. He has made it clear to his academic family that you can have both academic success and have real-world impact, and that the two don't have to be mutually exclusive. And he has served as a role model on how to be good advisors to our own students and how to fight for what you believe in. Gregory, as one of the oldest members of your academic family, I want you to know that we are so proud of you, not just for your research contributions and contributions to the SIG-Chi community, but for everything you've done for us as individuals and a large family. You continue to show up for us, and I'm glad we can show up for you today. Many of us in the audience wouldn't be here without that serendipitous meeting in the hallway with you. I know I wouldn't. We love you. I love you. Please join me in congratulating Gregory on being the recipient of the SIG-Chi Lifetime Research Award. Gregory, we all look forward to your talk.
That's the second time I've heard that introduction. For those that don't know, I gave this talk in Germany at the conference about a month ago, but they failed to record it. So I wanted to do it again so it could be recorded, and I said it absolutely had to have a Nin's introduction, which very touching, very moving, mostly false, but we'll let that slide. And Anin, just tell your father, Santosh, happy 90th birthday and happy 50th birthday to your sister. He's in Chicago celebrating those today. Okay, so I was in India all of last week. I just arrived this morning. I slept on the floor of JFK Airport last night. That's why I look fresh as a daisy right now. But when I got to my office this afternoon, the plaque for the award that I received came in the mail because they didn't have it in Germany. So this is the plaque. I will now give it to myself. Thank you. Okay. The title of the talk is Ignorance is Bliss, and I hope by the end you'll understand what I mean by that. But just to give you a little bit of a hint here. Actually, before I go, I wanted to give the people online a little bit of context. I'm in a room with about 3,000 people, just so you can get an idea. And for those of you here who are not on Zoom, there are about 5,581 people, give or take 5,500. Okay. Just so we can now get to know each other a little better. I'm going to talk a little bit about my career in human-computer interaction. That's HCI. Why it's called SIG-Chi, computer-human interaction, no idea. That's just because they decided Chi was easier to pronounce than H-Chi, I guess, 30-some, 40 years ago. The moral behind my meandering course is that you can jump into things intellectually that you know nothing about. If you are around smart people that you get along with, you don't have to worry. That's something that I've learned over time, and you'll see that I've jumped from topic to topic. And even my move to Northeastern was a jump into the unknown. But when you're surrounded by people that you respect and who you believe are probably better than you are yourself, you don't have to worry. But another corollary to that is you have two kinds of people in life. Those whose behaviors you want to imitate, and those whose behaviors you do not want to imitate. And I've had both of those in my life, and I think I am a great advisor and supervisor because I didn't feel I had the best model of a supervisor myself, and it helped me learn what not to do and how to be different. And also, the whole point of this talk is to thank all of the people that I've had the privilege of interacting with throughout my career. So you're going to see lots of pictures of people and where they are today. And I tried as best as possible to get pictures of what they looked like when I interacted with them. I wasn't always successful there. Okay, so let's start off. I'm not going to go way, way back tell you about all my exploits as a basketball player in high school who sat on the bench the entire time. I won't go into that. But I went to the University of Notre Dame, and I got a degree in mathematics. I was in the marching band as an undergraduate, largely because my third oldest brother, James, was in the marching band when he was at Notre Dame. And he pulled the rolling timpani, which was the signature instrument for the Notre Dame marching band, which meant he was always on national TV during halftime. You'd see the band come in, you'd see my brother sitting there staring at the camera, pulling this rolling timpani. And I said, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be in the limelight. So I auditioned to pull the rolling timpanis, but they had an opening in bass drum. And because I had played the clarinet, I knew the difference between a half note and a quarter note, which was the entire audition to play bass drum. And so I played the bass drum instead, and so was kind of buried in the middle of the band. So to get that attention, my junior year, the final game of the year, we decided we were going to imitate what the Air Force drum corps did. When they did their solo on the bass drum, they got on their heads and played the solo, and they were very good. So we decided that we would get on our heads as well. And that's me, the second from the left there, the one in absolutely horrible form, standing on my head. Shortly after that performance, I was kicked out of the band for abusing the equipment of the band. As a result of that, the man here, John Kozak, who was Associate Dean of the College of Science at Notre Dame, wrote in letters of recommendation for various scholarships that you'll notice there is one blemish on Gregory's academic record, and that's a withdrawal because he was kicked out of the band, and they told a story about why I had been kicked out of the band. And that ended up being a very good icebreaker. And so everyone who came to talk with me at these interviews, like the Marshall and the Rhodes Scholarship, says, oh, you're the one who stood on his head during halftime. I go, how do you know that? I said, because one of your letter writers talked about it. So the power of letter writers. I've always taken very seriously the responsibility of writing good letters for people so they can have the same kinds of advantages that I had. My father loved the fact that I got kicked out of the band. And when I was fortunate enough to be selected for a Rhodes Scholar, and he was being interviewed by one of the local newspapers, he referred to me as a rogue. I was his rogue scholar because I was obviously such a rogue on campus. I was very much not a rogue. That's probably the only act of defiance that I did my entire 4 years at the University of Notre Dame. No comments, my brother Stephen, who was there at the time. But that's why I was referred to as a campus rogue. So I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to go to Oxford, and I decided, this was in the mid-'80s, and I said, computer science, I think it's an up-and-coming field. See, I'm very clairvoyant, you can tell. And I decided that I wanted to switch from mathematics and study computer science, so I did a master's degree as a conversion course, and then went on to do the PhD. Now, during that time, actually, I've got some pictures here of where I've been. Those are the dreaming spires of, this doesn't have a pointer. You see the green dome there? That's the Sheldonian Theater. And I could see the Sheldonian Theater outside of my dorm window. You see the picture on the right there, the White Horse Pub. I'm not highlighting the White Horse Pub, but it was the window right above there. That was my room, my first year at Oxford, and it looked straight across to the Sheldonian Theater right on Broad Street. It was a beautiful, beautiful view, and at 11 p.m. when the pubs would close, I could sit on the ledge of my window and bid everyone a farewell on their way home. Now, intellectually, my PhD trajectory was not all that smooth. And by the middle of my second year in the PhD, second out of 3 years, I really had no idea what I was going to do for my PhD work. I was studying formal methods of software engineering, and one day, my advisor, Bernard Suffren, gave me a chapter of a book that he was writing, and he asked me, because he couldn't figure anything else for me to do productively, he asked me to review the paper. And I read this paper, and I was really inspired. He was using formalisms, mathematical formalisms, to describe properties of the usability of a system that humans were using. And I said, for the first time, I said, you can use math to talk about why people find computers easy or hard to use? That's really fascinating. And I was inspired, quite unintentionally, because he just gave it to me as a busy exercise to have one of his PhD students who was not being productive do something. I read this with a fine-tooth comb, had tons of corrections, went to him and I said, Bernard, this is what I want to do for my PhD. And he said, oh, well, I'm not doing that work anymore. This was kind of me closing that chapter. So if you want to do that, you're on your own. So I was on my own. The other thing I picked up during my Oxford experience was I fell in love with Megan Burke, who came to Oxford the year after I arrived there, and we were married in 1991. I will come back to that later in the talk. The other person I want to talk about who saved me was Professor Michael Harrison, who was at the University of York. Now, Anin said I did a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon. I actually did two postdocs. While I was still completing my PhD at Oxford, I went to the University of York, to their human-computer interaction group, where the subject of my thesis was exactly what they were doing, and they were funded in a European project to continue it, so it was a home for me. I was among people that not only liked what I was doing, but cared and nurtured me and brought me into the area of human-computer interaction, which I did not have at all at Oxford. So I will be forever grateful to Michael for having rescued me intellectually. And you'll see here the beautiful Minster at York, England. While I was at University of York, three friends that were there, Alan Dix, who is to this day probably the most genius of a man I have ever met, and he demonstrated to me that genius doesn't mean you have to be an asshole. He was the nicest, most considerate person I've ever met. Janet Finley and Russell Beal were PhD students at York. I was doing my postdoc there, and one day Russell said, you know, there's really not a textbook in human-computer interaction, and this looks like a field that's gaining some momentum. Why don't we write a textbook? So bear in mind that none of us had taught, neither had we written a book, but we decided to jump in and we wrote this particular textbook, and it was a tremendous effort of the four of us. First example of jumping in. If I had known how hard it would have been to write a textbook, I would have never agreed to do it. If I had realized that you get no credit for writing a textbook when you're looking for jobs, because books are only important if they become well-read and well-cited years down the road. So everyone advises students and postdocs, don't write books, because anyone can publish a book, at least in computer science. Anyone can publish a book. A good book takes years. Don't do that when you're young. So if I had had that advice and paid attention to it, would never have done this. This was a wonderful experience. It was a very influential textbook and a great friendship with these three friends and co-authors. After my York postdoc, I went to Carnegie Mellon to do a postdoc in software engineering with a combination of software architecture and what became human-computer interaction. There, I had two mentors in software engineering, David Garland and Mary Shaw. David was actually my mentor, and he was starting this field. He and Mary were starting to, in software engineering, highlight the importance of the structure and formalisms to represent what they referred to as the architecture of a complex software system. But Mary Shaw was also a tremendous career mentor, and she gave me the best piece of advice, and this is a piece of advice I always pass on to my own students or any student. When you're presenting a paper at a conference, you're not trying to regurgitate all of the details of that paper in your talk. Your goal is to get people to want to read the paper when you're after you have spoken. So don't give all the details. Motivate them to want to read those details. A great piece of advice of how to give an engaging kind of talk. A corollary to that is you very rarely walk out of a talk at a conference thinking, gosh, I wish that had been longer. Right? That's rarely the outcome. I had two other mentors. Len Bass was also someone at the Software Engineering Institute who was an expert in analyzing software architectures. And Len's influence on me was the following. He said, Gregory, you're clearly smart with the math and whatever, but that's really not going to have an impact in the world. And someday you're going to learn you need to do more practical things. And he was right. Bonnie John, my second year of my postdoc, decided to fund half of my postdoc. And sorry to embarrass you, she's never going to watch this. I told you about advice that you want to follow, advice you don't want to follow, or examples. When I first started working with Bonnie, she said to me, well, Gregory, you're probably wondering how much effort you should put into working with me. So my mentor, and I won't list who this is, a very famous computer scientist, said that the average postdoc works 100 hours a week. So since I've got you for 50% of the time, I will expect 50 hours a week from you for half of your postdoc. To this day, I have never, ever judged someone by the number of hours they put into doing things. It's about producing. It's not about how much time. I've had brilliant students who spend very little time and they achieve amazing things. And I've had students who work to the bone and don't accomplish things. The amount of time you spend is really not the goal and not the kind of advice I give anyone in terms of how to be an effective researcher. So thank you, Bonnie, for giving me an example of how not to measure my success. After the time at Carnegie Mellon, I wanted to go to a university that respected both software engineering and human-computer interaction. Now, this was the mid-1990s, and at that time, both fields, software engineering and human-computer interaction, were considered fringe fields in computer science. So not only was I wanting to go to a place that would identify and respect two fringe areas in computer science, but they had to be strong in both of those and want the two to connect together. This gave me a very limited set of places to choose from, but there were some. And the place that I decided to go to was Georgia Tech. And I'm going to tell you why I chose Georgia Tech. So they were very welcoming, and there were three elements to it. First of all, Peter Freeman was the founding dean of the College of Computing at Georgia Tech. And Jim Foley, who competed with Peter Freeman for the position of the founding dean and was not selected, the first thing Peter Freeman did was he hired Jim Foley to come and start what was called the GVU Center, which highlighted HCI research, or was going to highlight. Two leaders who were very selfless and wanted to build strength in an area and were willing to be very innovative and bold in doing that and put a lot of effort into recruiting strong faculty, but not just to have strong faculty, faculty to come in and would be supported. So the leadership really mattered. Colin Potts was the very first person who contacted me. He was on the hiring committee in the College of Computing. Kishore Ramachandran was the chair of the hiring committee. And those were the first two people I had much interaction with at Georgia Tech, and they made a wonderful impression on me. Whether or not I was going to go to Georgia Tech, I came away with an extremely strong impression of that place because those two individuals made a point of being positive and being inviting toward me. Within my first year, I met these five individuals, and not only were they colleagues in the same department, they became friends. And I realized the importance of having people around you that not only you could have intellectual exchange with and you could feel confident they could give you good advice, but whose company you actually enjoyed. And to this day, once a month, I have breakfast with Mark Gusdell and John Stasko. Even though we are now at 3 different universities, we have our once a month breakfast just to catch up. And it's been wonderful having these people who all are still good friends of mine. So let's get back to what I decided to do once I went to Georgia Tech. Remember, I was a mathematician. I was doing formal methods of software engineering. I was loosely applying it to human-computer interaction. But I really didn't feel like I was having much influence at all in the field. And one small piece of that evidence is that I could never get a paper accepted at the major conference, the CHI conference. I even applied to the doctoral consortium, which is supposed to take all comers, and the review I got back was that my research really had nothing to do with HCI. So I was thinking, maybe I should, if this is an area that I care about, maybe I should rethink a little bit how I go about doing that research. And it caused me to reflect on the kinds of visionaries who really influenced the world of computing and influenced me. There were people like Vannevar Bush, who came up with the mythical Memex machine written in 1945. There's Ivan Sutherland, essentially the founder of modern computer graphics in the mid-60s. Ted Nelson, an absolute kook of an individual, but the one who invented the idea of hypertext in his master's thesis at Brown in the 60s. Doug Engelbart, who did the mother of all demos in 1968, showing transatlantic collaborative computing with computing technology. Alan Kay, who was one of the founders of the idea that computing can be made personal to individuals. And finally, Mark Weiser, who in 1991 wrote what I think is one of the most influential computer science essays. And I read it my first semester when I was at Georgia Tech, so in September of 1994. And this, outlined the field that he referred to as ubiquitous computing, or UbiComp. And I said, that's the kind of work I want to do. And so I realized that at Georgia Tech, there were not a lot of people that were comfortable or familiar with formal methods of software engineering, but there were an awful lot of people that were very good at hacking with new kinds of technology and really liked inventing things. And I thought, well, I could probably inspire those individuals to look at what Mark Weiser was talking about with this idea of ubiquitous computing, and we might be able to do something interesting. So I decided within 6 months of arriving at Georgia Tech that I was going to completely change the direction of my research career. And that was a very good decision, but something I really knew nothing about. And together with Chris Atkinson, we formed this group called the Future Computing Environments Group, the purpose of which was to try to create examples of people using cutting-edge technologies that we thought would be commonplace in a relatively short time frame. Here it says 10 to 15 years. It was really more like 5 years out. Mobile computing was happening. Streaming audio and video were just coming out in the mid to late 90s, and we wanted to take those technologies, none of which I or we had invented, but weave them together to provide experiences for people that themselves would be novel. And there were 2 examples of this. And this is the point on this slide of having early success is really important. So the first successful foray into ubiquitous computing was observing when you have small mobile devices, what makes this device so different from a desktop device is that it moves. It changes its location. But no programs up to that point used that piece of information to provide any added value. We were starting to get a commercial release of GPS in the mid-90s, and so cars were starting to have navigation systems outdoor, but there was no equivalent of being able to do that indoor. So we mocked together an indoor positioning system, and this is very kind of silly, and I owe this all to Chris. We went to Radio Shack one night, and we bought 20 TV remote controllers. We popped open the case, we soldered down a different button on each of those remote controllers. We tied them up in the ceiling and put them to a constant power source, so there were just a number of IR beacons in the ceiling. And as you walked along, if you had an IR receiver, you would receive a different ID, and so you could basically know from that ID that you're in a different location in that room. So a very crude but effective indoor location system, and we used it for giving tours of a lab that we had at the GVU Center when people would come in once a month to see demos of the researchers. And we handed them an Apple Newton message pad with an IR beacon added onto it, and as you walked around, you would see a map of the lab, and there would be stars on that map, and it would highlight the one that you were closest to and tell you what that project was. It would also keep track of where you've been throughout the day, so at the end of your visit, you'd get an email in HTML that would tell you, here are the demos that you visited and where they were. So a very simple example of a mobile indoor tour guide, which was the first of its kind. That led to the area of context-aware computing, using pieces of information that describe the context of an interaction, like location, to provide additional services to individuals. I highlight 2 individuals here. I did not have any PhD students my first 2 years when I was at Georgia Tech. My 3rd year review, they said, Gregory, we're really worried you don't have PhD students because we think it means your research isn't that deep, and so you're not able to attract any PhD students. Fortunately, I had 4 years of postdoc experience, so I had a lot of confidence in myself. I also knew that I didn't want to bring in PhD students until I knew what the deep problems are for them to explore. So I worked a lot with undergrads and master's students to pull together these demonstrations. And Dietmar Aust was a visiting German master's student. He's now a professor at the University of Dortmund. And Jason Hong was a sophomore undergraduate student that was in my first software engineering course, and he decided to work with me as well. Jason went on to get his PhD at Berkeley, and he's now a full professor at Carnegie Mellon in the HCI Institute, and a very wealthy entrepreneur. So master's students and undergrads can do you very well, in fact. After the success of that one example, I wanted to do another example of a new kind of experience weaving together new technologies. So, and I wanted to be futuristic, but not that far out into the future. So this was 1995, and I decided, let's create a classroom that used all the technologies that were coming into classrooms, like projectors, and this was when the web was just becoming popular. And you saw that instructors were given a larger and larger fire hose to point at the students and just overwhelm them with more and more information. And very little was done to help the students keep track of what was happening in the class. So Classroom 2000 wasn't about just presenting all of this information. It was about recording it in a way that was very easy for individuals to consume after the fact. So we created a multimedia authoring environment that all the instructor had to do was come in, write on an electronic whiteboard. You'll see in a bit that it's very similar to writing on a regular whiteboard, and projected screens that would take, when you fill up one whiteboard, it would go on to another board, and so you could see the history of the lecture that you would normally see if someone's writing on a blackboard in a lecture hall, and then web browsing, and whatever websites you visited, the time at which you visited would be logged, and at the end of the lecture, within a minute, there would be a multimedia recording of the class, and you could go to the slides, and you could click on anything that was written by hand or the slide itself, and it would take you to that point in the lecture and would show you a view. That's not that view, it's a view from a camera in the back, and would show streaming audio and video of the lecture. The first demonstration of that was written in, I think we did it in BASIC. And Nitin Sawhney, who was a master's student who went on to do a PhD at the Media Lab, and I pulled together the first version of that. And then Jason Brotherton, one of my first PhD students, worked on taking that whole system and making it work in a turnkey way so that thousands of lectures could be recorded by tens of instructors in multiple classrooms throughout the Georgia Tech campus. So that it became a normal experience for students, because what I wanted to explore was how does it change the teaching and learning experience when these kinds of technologies are not just demos, they're part of your everyday learning experience. And that takes a lot of effort to do, but I had the advantage of being a software engineer who thought about the architectures of systems, so you could build systems and you could change their functionality over time and still maintain all of that, the legacy of the system. So my software engineering background helped in building an evolving system that was using cutting edge technologies. So I'm very proud of this work, but I'm going to show you now the single proudest accomplishment of that period of my life. And it's the only time in my career that I intentionally had a video made that was intended to be humorous.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3. My gal rides in a limousine, but I buy the gasoline. Oh boy, that's where my money goes. Here's my gal, eats banana splits, but I eat cold bread and grits. Oh boy, that's where my money goes. Oh boy, that's where my money goes.
So I don't know how many of you around my age remember the MasterCard commercials that were all along these lines of showing things that you could buy. So those of us that are in their mid to late 50s and beyond remember this series of commercials. I want to show you the people in this picture and where they are today. So this is Jason Brotherton, the former Jason Brotherton. He was the video mastermind, but also the PhD student behind the success of the Classroom 2000 project. He went on to be a professor at Ball State and then did a postdoc at University College London. This was Anand, who introduced me at the beginning. This was before he decided that it would look better when he shaved his head. And he's now, he went to be a researcher at Intel Research Berkeley, and then was faculty at Carnegie Mellon's HCI Institute, and became the director of the HCII, and then moved to be the dean at University of Washington. This is Jen Mankoff. Jen, who married Anand. There's a joke in my lab that Gregory didn't know which of his students were dating each other. It was obvious between Jen and Anand. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Jen, after she graduated, got a faculty position at University of UC Berkeley, then moved with Anand to Carnegie Mellon, and then moved with Anand to the University of Washington as a chair professor in CSE there. Kai Trung also worked on the Classroom 2000 project. He was an undergraduate with me and then stayed on to do a PhD. He's now a full professor at the University of Toronto in their computer science department. David Nguyen was a PhD student at Georgia Tech and then left the PhD program, went off and did other things, and then went back to doing a PhD at UC Irvine and connected with one of my former PhD students, Jillian Hayes. So he's actually an academic grandchild of mine, and now is a consultant for entrepreneurial efforts at the University of Minnesota. Kent Lyons was not one of my students, worked in wearable computing with Thad Starner, and has had a number of industrial research positions, the most recently at Toyota Research Institute. And Rob Orr was one of my PhD students, decided it was better for him to move on and do other things. He's a very successful internet security consultant at Appian. So that experience, building a mobile tour guide that worked during actual demo days, a classroom system that worked for many years for many instructors, had me thinking that the real value of the kind of research I was going to do was in creating living laboratories. Not just doing demos of things you could do, but creating applications that people used to fulfill everyday activities. So the next living laboratory that I decided to embark on was working in the home. And in 1998, the Georgia Research Alliance had some extra money available, and they were looking for big proposals. They had about $750,000 that they were willing to put into some big effort. And Chris and I proposed that since internet was now moving out of the business sphere and moving into the domestic space, we want to explore the impact of connectivity in a home and technologies within that home. And so we pitched this idea of a residential laboratory for exploring new technologies, and they bought it. We built a house, a two-story house that had 2 apartments in it that had the identical layout. The intention was for people to live in that house and for us to be building technologies and explore their experience with the house. Georgia Tech would not allow us to do that because the people we would have living there, we wanted to be researchers. And so we would essentially be compensating them as researchers, and we would be landlords. And Georgia Tech, being a state institution, said, no, 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 you can't do that. So we couldn't have people live in the house permanently. So we got around that. Stephen Intilli here understands this whole experience because he did something very similar at the House End project at MIT around the same time. Now, what was really important was we used this living laboratory to recruit top talent to Georgia Tech. Irfan Issa, who actually joined before he was one of the first people to help us position this idea. He gave us the name of calling it the Aware Home, not the broadband residential whatever we called it. Aaron Bobick and Thad Starner. What do all 3 of these have in common? They were all 3 from the Media Lab, and they all 3 came down to Georgia Tech within a 2-year span. And you may recognize this individual here. I think she's online. Beth Minot, who's now the Dean of the Curry College of Computer Sciences. She and Wendy Rogers from psychology were the ones that had to say, it's not just about the technology, it's what you do with the technology. And they pushed us in the direction of looking at using these technologies to support an aging population wanting to stay in their own home. Not just because those individuals want to age in place, but often because their loved ones who took informal care of them and lived elsewhere needed peace of mind and security. So you needed to not just support the individuals in the home, but those who are connected to those individuals. In addition to these faculty, who together formed a great team, we had a number of undergraduates who were very influential. The top one here, and he's online, I saw earlier, Corey Kidd, was the very first manager of the Aware Home. He was the one who was going to live in the home, and he was also the manager for the home, and he wasn't allowed to live there. So very sorry, Corey. Would have saved you a lot in rent, but you know that's the way it goes. Corey went on to do his PhD at the Media Lab in robotics and has been a successful entrepreneur and out on the West Coast. He was followed by Thomas O'Connell, who was an undergrad and then a master's student. And I cannot stress enough, these folks were there 24/7, taking care of what was a very fun but always breaking down sandbox for all of the students to be able to play with. And nothing would have happened if we hadn't had these 2 individuals. Now, what happened in this sandbox? The most important thing that happened was a lot of really influential people came out of this period of time. So these are 6 PhD students of mine that all focused their efforts in projects in the Aware Home. You may know some of them. Probably the most famous of these is the one up at the top, Shwetak Patel, who shortly after he left Georgia Tech to become a professor at University of Washington, was named a MacArthur Genius Award. I take a lot of credit for that, but you know, I don't let him know that. And the others here, you can see a number of different academic and industrial positions. Also had a postdoc, Matt Reynolds, who worked with Shwetak Patel, went to Duke to run their smart home effort, and then was recruited back or over to University of Washington, and had some master's students. The person flanking me to the left, Siddhant Gupta, got his PhD at University of Washington. University of Washington owes me a lot. They got a lot of good students, a lot of great faculty. They take all the students that would come here, they take them all. He went to be at Microsoft Research and then recently left to lead the effort at CloudWorks. Mayank Goyal was a master's student at the same time, and Mayank is now a professor at the HCI Institute at Carnegie Mellon. And this young man, Scott Saponis, came to me the very first day of his undergraduate career, walked in with his friend and said, "Dr. Abowd, we heard you've got this thing in the home and we'd like to do something." So I took the two of them in my car, we went to Radio Shack, and I said, "Buy whatever you'd like. Okay, we'll take it back to the Aware home and you can start doing anything." He worked for 4 years in the Aware home, went to get his PhD where? University of Washington, and then is at Microsoft Research. So a lot of great people came out of that particular era. And we had a lot of fun. So I think this was the last time. I'm not sure. I think the last time the CHI conference, the main conference that I got this award at, was in Boston. Shwetak and Julie are married. There's another set of students that I advised that got married. I actually did not know that they were dating. And it was a joke how long it was going to take before I realized. And they sat me down one day to tell me. I said, okay, they broke the news to me. I said, fine. This is a caricature we had done that I've always cherished. And when I was promoted to full professor, we had a celebration. And this was my idea of celebrating the promotion. So we got a bouncy castle for the kids to be able to jump around with, and a little Segway there that we went around the neighborhood, and we just all had a great little picnic. My students' idea of celebrating my promotion was to cover my entire office in aluminum foil and put a blue outhouse door there and say, "Your office is now the toilet of the future." And literally, they covered all the ceiling tiles, every piece of paper, every book, every pencil, all covered in aluminum foil. So now, let's talk a little bit about how I transitioned from the early days of the Aware home into a different approach on how to use these kinds of technologies. And it all started with a project with a master's student, Molly Stevens. She wanted to allow people to keep memories that connected physical artifacts with digital memories. And she designed this platform where you would take any physical object, you would place it in that platform, it would be digitized, and then you could create the memory that would link to it. You know, akin a little bit to what the Memex was trying to do. But the whole idea here was that you could create these memories that would connect physical and digital. The next time you took that physical object and placed it in the memory box, it would pull up the memories that you had attached to it. At that same time, I had 2 visiting German master's students that wanted a project over 3 months. This was 1998. My father had just died, and my father was an 8mm film enthusiast. And he had 30 years of a film archive of my family's history. 12 kids, Catholic, lots of baptisms, first communions, confirmations, weddings, all these things. My dad had recorded all of it, and then we realized after he died that he was the only one that could get the 8mm projector to work. So I took all of the film and had it digitized, and with these students created a system that allowed, this was pre-YouTube, just want to let everyone know this was 2001, a way to view all these videos, annotate them, and use past annotations to make recommendations for annotations of future scenes that you would view. And we do some simple kind of scene boundary detection. And it created this tool where I could now go and look at the 30 years, and I could say, well, give me scenes of Christmas from the 1960s. And it would produce all of these videos, and I'd say package it up as a DVD, and then I could print a DVD, and I could give a really meaningful and, more importantly, cheap gift to my brothers and sisters for Christmas. I did that for a few years. That's a picture of me. I'm the one on the right. You can tell because clearly the cutest one in the picture. Don't look at that little oaf sitting in the middle. No, Peter, he's not that cute. But what I did with the success of that, I, at this time, had 2 of my own children, Aiden and Blaze, and there's a picture of the 2 of them around this time. And I said, well, I'm going to start to digitize the movies from my own family and put this into the family video archive so I could use it going forward. Now at this time, this was 2002, Aiden was 5 years old and was already been diagnosed as a non-speaking individual with autism. I was transferring in the videos one evening, and I saw images of Aiden when he was 18 months old, looking, as far as I could tell, like a normal 18-month-old. Then I saw a video from him 8 months later on vacation in Hawaii, and I said, wow, that is a completely different child. He had stimming behaviors. He was not responding to people. He wasn't making eye contact. And I said, my wife and I, he was diagnosed shortly after that trip to Hawaii with autism, but that change that was so clear when you saw the videos and the 8-month difference was not that clear to my wife and I. And I said, hold on. All these things I was doing kind of for fun in capturing long-term experience may actually have a more meaningful application. And that launched an entire 12, 15-year career in looking at how information technologies can address the challenges and opportunities of autism. And around this time, and to this day, I owe this whole phase of my career to my two sons, Aiden and Blaze. I think they may be listening. I know Megan is listening, my wife. But around this time, Rosa Arriaga joined the College of Computing at Georgia Tech. She was a developmental psychologist, and her husband had been hired as a computer scientist, and she came along and wanted to have an academic position. And the dean said, anyone want to work with Rosa? And I said, developmental psychologist, I'll work with Rosa. And what ensued from there is Rosa and I co-advised a number of students, Jillian Hayes, Julie Keens, Fatima Bujarwa. Tracy Weston was co-advised with Thad Starner, Hua Zhenghong, Ping Wang was with Jim Ray, and Ari Siptati. All of these individuals looked at different ways that information technologies can be used to address some opportunity or challenge for stakeholders dealing with autism, whether it's the individuals, the families, clinicians, therapists, you name it. They all did different examples there. Now, the reason I spend so much time on this slide is I want you to make the obvious observation of the demographic of people on this slide. I think it's no coincidence that when you do certain kinds of research, you attract certain kinds of people. It's not a question of what's easy or what's hard, it's what's appealing to different individuals. And I firmly believe that if you want to have diversity in your research group, the people, or in your organization, you should think about doing different things that appeal to different individuals, rather than try to do a hard sell on what you're already doing to people who may not be interested in that. And these were fabulous, unbelievably successful women in computer science that all were attracted to this challenge of technologies for stakeholders in autism, and Ari and me. Now, Jim Ray was a colleague of mine, and around this time we got an NSF Expeditions Award to look at the idea of creating objective measures of human behavior that were motivated by how you diagnose social communicative conditions like autism and other kinds of situations. Using, it's typically done, even to this day, is mostly done through clinical expertise. So the eyes and the experience of an individual determine whether someone is behaving according to some norm prescribed in some manual. And we wanted to say, well, how could you turn that into something that might be more objective and more quantitative and could be collected from everyday experiences? So we launched this effort, and Agatha Rozga and Audrey Sutherland helped run something called the Child Study Lab, which collected a lot of data of young children with adults in social communicative interactions. E. Han was a PhD student of mine in information visualization, and he worked with a nonprofit called the Center for Discovery, building visualization tools to help them understand the data they were collecting for all these medically frail individuals, many of whom were on the autism spectrum, using visualization tools to help them see trends over years, not just over days and weeks. I met this man, Ron Oberleitner, quite accidentally. Ron ended up he graduated from Notre Dame a year before me, but I met him 20 years after that. And he I was an entrepreneur, created a company that was ultimately became called Behavior Imaging, and he commercialized the research thesis work of Jillian Hayes and Nazneen, who now works at Google. And so he helped me take thesis research and turn it into products for the communities that it was designed for. I stopped doing research in autism around 2018, 2017, because I thought I was going to have a lot more impact in the space of autism by working with the different stakeholders in the community. From about 2008, I worked with lots of people in the Atlanta area, and there was expertise in many different areas of related to autism in Atlanta. Genetics at Emory, surveillance monitoring at the CDC, where if you ever saw those reports that come out every other year, 1 in 98 individuals have autism, 1 in 86, 1 in 68. They came out of the group in Atlanta that performed these national studies. There were also Children's Healthcare of Atlanta was putting a lot of effort into clinical support for autism. All these different communities were in Atlanta, including people at Georgia State and at Georgia Tech, but they didn't know each other. And so in 2008, I decided to bring all these people together, and we would go around and visit each other's labs just to get to know each other a little bit better. By 2015, this had taken off into a nonprofit that was serving the community by giving free and open education and open discussion about challenges and issues related to autism, like insurance mandates at the state level. That happened in Georgia because of the Atlanta Autism Consortium, and it convinced me that though I was having some influence as a researcher building technologies, I was having much more influence as someone who pulled together this nonprofit and was serving the community. So, around 2012, what was I? I don't know, my mid-40s-ish. I had a midlife crisis, an intellectual midlife crisis. And here's what it was. Mark Weiser wrote this very influential article in 1991, and it said that the most profound technologies are those that disappear. This influenced generations of computer science researchers, so much so that I didn't think there was any more need to have a specific community connected to ubiquitous computing. That was called the UbiComp community. I thought there was no reason to have that isolated community because everyone in computer science, for the most part, was doing things that were about the ideas of ubiquitous computing. So I said, UbiComp, the community, is dead. Long live computing, which manifests ubiquitous computing. I said the most profound research topics are those that disappeared. I was trying to say to my own community, we should either declare success and move on and forget this conference, or, because you can never tell academics to stop having a conference. Once they have a conference, it's like Pavlov's dog. They got to go every year. You know, single-cell proteomics, they're going to be doing that for 50 years, right? So you can't get rid, because it's not just about the intellectual content, it's about the community of practice and the people. That's important. So I said, well, if we're going to stay as a community, we need to start thinking about what are the new problems that we should be addressing that no one else is addressing. So it was really a call to say, let's redefine what this community was about. But that's easy to say, look, we need to redefine ourselves, but I didn't give any new definition. So a few years later, I went to Weiser's paper and I said, well, what did he foresee in his paper? And if you haven't read this paper by Weiser, you absolutely should, because he foresaw what he called the inch, foot, and yard scale technologies. You can view those as the smartphone, the tablet, and electronic whiteboards and jumbo billboards. He predicted all of that in the late 80s. And I said, but there were some technologies by the mid-2000s that he didn't predict that were equally influential in society. And because I wanted to be memorable, like Weiser, inch, foot, yard, very memorable, but, you know, not that clever. So I said, well, what are the technologies that had emerged by the mid-2000s? Well, there were cloud technologies, distributed computing, cloud storage, cloud computing, unlimited effectively storage, unlimited computing cycles. That was becoming a part of our everyday practice by the mid-2000s. There was the reintroduction of humans into the computing platform through what was called crowdsourcing, or services like Mechanical Turk, that would allow humans to do things that they do very easily, and allow that to be harnessed through kind of programmatic and crowdsourced platforms. That was the crowd. So they said, oh, you got the cloud, you got the crowd. I see a trend here. What else? Well, Weiser didn't really predict the proliferation of technologies that we now refer to as the Internet of Things and wearable computing. So I said, okay, we've got the cloud, the crowd, Internet of Things, and wearable computing. Doesn't really roll off the tongue. But if you think about it, devices that are attached to physical objects and to humans create this thin layer over the physical world that connects the physical world to the digital world. What is a thin layer that envelops something? A shroud. Cloud, crowd, shroud. Those were the technologies that emerged in the mid-2000s. I said, this is a new generation of technologies. I loved it. My students loved it. No one else cared. But I did want to pursue this idea of the shroud technologies, IoT and wearable technologies. And my colleague Thad Starner, who I'd helped to recruit to Georgia Tech, someone I've always been very jealous of, because he also a genius, a great showman, does incredible demos of technologies, and has an unbelievable, uncanny ability to motivate students to do the impossible. I'll give you an example. He and I taught a course in mobile and ubiquitous computing. And I slaved over organizing this course, because as much as I love Thad, he's not the most organized individual in the world. So I put together all these materials, all these potential projects that students could work on, and show them on like the third day of class. You could work on any of these fantastic projects, and I've shown you what you might do. Thad walks in at the end of the lecture, right up there. He says, who would like to work on allowing dolphins to talk to humans? Damn it. Like, everyone wanted to do that, and he got all the best students in the class to work on that frickin' dolphin project, which he's now been doing for 15 years with lots of funding. So that's Thad. So I've always been kind of chasing Thad. And I have 4 examples here of students that worked with me in looking at how we might use technologies on the human body to do interesting things. So extending the kind of interaction you could have. These kinds of smartwatches have a very small interaction surface, so how can you leverage other parts of the body as input? Chang Zhang, who's now at Cornell, worked on that. Aman Parnami worked on, you have multiple devices. A lot of devices work by allowing certain gestures to be recognized, but very few, when he was working on, allowed gestures between 2 devices to work to do something meaningful. And the only contribution I had to Aman's thesis was one particular multi-device interaction that I will demonstrate very quickly to you. The sip and spit interaction would take a piece of information off of one screen and place it somewhere else. If you could recognize, got a microphone, you can recognize that, and you can recognize, then you can take the content from there and place it there. I know, it's amazing. Needless to say, he passed his thesis despite that example. Gabriel Reyes worked on using very small depth cameras to allow the extended range of interaction. Siri kind of got a little freaked out by that last interaction. And Edison Tomás, he was very interested in not just doing interactions with these devices, but using these devices to understand human activity. He was particularly interested in how can you tell with a single commodity device on your wrist whether the wearer of that device is eating. Not what they're eating, but if they are eating. And so he did some of the first eating detection systems using very simple IMU data on a commodity smartwatch. Now, around this time, it was becoming clear that the platform that people all had on them was a very comprehensive sensor platform that could collect lots of data about the individual that is connected to that device. And there was a very influential project at Dartmouth called Student Life that took an example of doing this with a cohort of 50 students and showed that you could collect information that would help you predict the effectiveness of those students performing in their classes. So you could determine, you could predict student GPA from passively collected data on a smartphone. Whatever you might think about doing that, I was very intrigued by this notion that, okay, lots of people are carrying around these sensor platforms. You can collect information and you can do things to understand bulk human behaviors. So we explored a number of those particular examples, and my colleague Thomas Plutz co-advised a number of students, Hyuk Kwan, who's now at Emory, and Mara bin Morshed, who's now at Samsung Research, that were looking at examples of how you can do passively collected data from large sets of people to understand that human behavior. I'm giving very short shrift to the work that these folks have done, but I want to show you the names of these people. I also worked with Munmunda Chowdhury, a social computing expert who was very interested in looking at the passive data of social media and using natural language processing to understand something about the mood, the affect, the mental conditions of the individuals who post on social media. And we worked with Vedant Daswain, who, by the way, is coming here as a postdoc in Koori next year, and Donghui Yu, who's also about to graduate and do either a postdoc or a faculty position, he hasn't decided yet, worked on those ideas of using passively collected data to understand organizational behavior, whether that organization is a university or a company. Now, that was the cloud, crowd, shroud era, using technology that already existed. And remember, I showed you that slide of all these visionaries of the future, and I said I wanted to be a visionary, someone who helps think about what the world might be like, so wanting to invent things. So I had one more crack at this, started about 8-9 years ago. I'm going to describe this student. I'm going to go back to Mark Weiser's influential essay. Please read it if you haven't. It's really good, easy to read, and very influential. The second sentence said, they weave themselves in the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. Well, one day, I think it was in 2015 or 2016, these two individuals from Georgia Tech, Eric Vogel, who's a material scientist, and Mike Filler, who's a chemical engineer, walk into my office and they say, Gregory, we've been told we should talk to you. We have discovered a way to be able to grow transistors in a controlled way, but in bulk, so manufacture computational devices in a very different way than how they're manufactured today. We think this is really cool. We have no idea why this would be interesting to the world. And I said, do you know who Mark Weiser is? And of course they said no. I gave them I said, please read it. I said, all you have to do is the first paragraph and you'll understand why I'm interested in what you're talking about. And they helped to launch an effort to look at how we might use new techniques for producing computational things in a very different way than how the whole computing industry operates. And I said, we can do this. They were showing me, we can do this, but why would we do this? And I went on a fool's errand for the first 2, 3, 4 years, thinking of all these really interesting things we might do with these kind of computational materials, like electronic Post-it notes. And I had all these kind of demonstrations of things that, that you might be able to do with things that cost the same as pieces of paper, self-sustained, generated their own energy, and did functional computational things. But who needs an electronic Post-it note? Right? I had a demonstration I'll show you of a Fitbit. I called it the infinite bit, that could power itself and could count the number of steps simply by the swaying of your arm, right? Using very low energy collaboration with Kennick over here. But the problem was those individual applications would not sway people to say, yes, this is the way of the future. And then about 3 years ago, about a year before I came here to Northeastern, I had a little bit of a revelation myself. And it was again saying, well, the direction that all of computing is going, particularly ubiquitous computing, is the wrong direction. There are a lot of famous essays in computer science that are such and such considered harmful, go to considered harmful. That was the first one by Edsger Dijkstra. And so I think ubiquitous computing is considered harmful. Let me tell you why. In today's world and for the foreseeable future, we have an insatiable desire to have more and more data and more devices that collect that data. And there's too much of an economic incentive for that to continue. We are not going to stop. We're not going to quelch that insatiable desire for more and more devices and computational things that collect more and more data. Okay, so I'm going to accept that. You could argue with me, but I'm going to accept that. Can't change that. But the way we manufacture these devices is a threat to the planet. Right? We're using resources and we're creating waste that we don't know how to recycle and handle, and this is very dangerous. However, we can, and I would say we must, stop that. So if you believe we're always going to have this insatiable desire for more and more data and more devices that get that data and do things with it, but we can't continue manufacturing things that are computational the same way, the conclusion I draw from that, rather than saying what one thing should these computational materials do, is that everything should have this philosophy. We must think differently about how we make things that compute. We must consider how they're powered. We must consider what materials they use. We must consider how we manufacture them in the processes. And we need to think about the life cycle implications of all of that. So it's not an electronic post-it note so much that we want, or the infinite bit so much that we want, but a world in which computational things minimize their environmental impact. Now, in the world of computer science, this has already taken hold in large data centers, but it has not taken hold in the world of the Internet of Things, right? That's the gospel that I'm trying to spread now. So I refer to this. Weiser's paper was the computer of the 21st century. Mine is the material of the 21st century. We got to rethink computing. I'm going to give you a few examples of some of my students. So Thad and I co-advised Nivedita Arora, who's going to start in ECE at Northwestern. Not Northeastern, unfortunately, at Northwestern. And she developed ways to be able to harvest vibrational energy with thin multi-layer materials to provide wireless sensor networks. Kenek and I co-advised Dingchen Zhang. Dingchen, I believe, is on the call. He was the one who did one example of something like the infinite bit. So creating devices that use patterns of light, which can be detected very efficiently, but can be used to determine activity around the surface of something. When you pass over a surface, that pattern of light change can be detected, and when you have arrays of these devices, you can turn those patterns into meaning about the relative motions of two different objects. Rosa and I co-advised Jungwook Park. Jungwook is on the call. And Jungwook was very interested in allowing individuals to create computation on mobile platforms using harvestable energy forms. And he used the car as his example. The car has lots of different sources of energy: vibration, heat. He was particularly interested in the fact that it moved and moves fairly quickly. Might you be able to harvest wind energy to support computation as a retrofit somewhere on the particular device? He now works at Accenture Labs. Shavik Das and I co-advised Jungwook Do, who will be defending in 3 weeks and will then go work at JP Morgan Chase. Jungwook was very interested in how you can use these computational materials to increase people's trust in sensors. And by that I mean, when you have a camera on a device, can you trust when that camera is recording or when it is not recording you? Right? Some of you probably have covers that you put over your webcam. Creates a physical barrier. And you're pretty sure when that physical barrier is in front of the camera, it doesn't matter what the camera's doing, it's not going to record you. Right? So how can you do that in a computational material way? And he's done that with microphones, and he's done that with RFID tags as well. Last example will be my final PhD student at Georgia Tech. Tingyu is looking at a variety of ways of creating sustainable examples of these computational materials. And one clever idea that he had in conjunction with people at Accenture Labs is how much you create a sensor that self-destructs after it does its critical sensing performance, like a leakage detector, a water detector, that once it detects its water and signals, then decomposes. So, next stage of my life. Jumping into the unknown. In December of 2020, I accepted the offer to come here at Northeastern and be a dean when I had never been a chair, and I had been an associate dean, but really not much of an associate dean. I learned now, given what I asked my associate deans to do, I wasn't really an associate dean. So why did I do that? The story I tell everyone, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way, because I'm not saying in this slide that Georgia Tech is 20 or 30 years ahead of Northeastern. Not at all. When I joined the faculty at Georgia Tech in the College of Computing, it was an organization on the rise. They were in the mid-20s in computer science. 25 years later, 27 years later when I left, they were number 5. I had something to do with that, but not everything to do with that. It was the leadership there that hired strong faculty and was willing to be bold about redefining what computing should be in an academic environment. And I said, at Northeastern, I saw that happening across the board, but particularly in engineering. Engineering had jumped 20 ranking points in the previous 15 years, more than any other college of engineering in the nation. And it was on the rise. I said, I want to be there in a place that's on the rise, because I think leadership has a big influence on whether you continue to be on the rise or not. And I wanted to be part of that. For those of you who are not from Northeastern in the audience here, and those online who don't know, a little bit about the College of Engineering, and I'm sorry for the people who are College of Engineering folks here. We have 10,000 students, 40% roughly are undergrad, the rest are graduate students. About 750 PhD students, the balance are master's students, the largest master's program in the country. We have a variety of academic programs. We have a large and incredibly strong faculty, particularly at the junior level. It's not just that we hire great people, or you have hired great people here at the College of Engineering, but the College of Engineering has put in place, before I got here, infrastructure to help support those young faculty to have early success. And one indication of that are the number of early career awards that our junior faculty have gotten. We also have become increasingly strong in terms of externally funded research. That figure from last year, $92.5 million. This year, counting our collaboration with the Costas Research Institute, we're over $100 million. So the first college at Northeastern to bring in over $100 million in a given year in research awards. Kudos to everyone. Yes. Yeah. And I can't stress enough that that has everything to do with me. No. It's relatively little to do with me, but I'm glad to be along for the ride. Another distinction, we all know that Northeastern is distinguished by its experiential undergraduate and graduate experience. The leading piece of that is the co-op program, but we are now being recognized as a global university, and we've turned a very important corner now. We have 14 campuses. We're finally at the point where we've decided we're going to consolidate, so we're going down one. So the San Francisco campus will no longer exist after the end of this calendar year. So we're starting to expand and then try to consolidate. That's a sign of maturity, also a sign of relief for some people. But remember how I said it's good to jump into something you know not much about, as long as you're surrounded by people you like and respect and are better than you? College of Engineering, before I got here, had an incredibly good leadership team. I've made minor tweaks to that leadership team, but this is the reason why the College of Engineering, or one of the reasons why the College of Engineering is as successful as it has been. What I don't list here, and I see one of them, we have research institute leaders as well that are bringing us forward. So this kind of team, this kind of family makes me feel very proud to be here. I'm also never going to give up as a researcher, and I'm pleased to see some of the people on this slide here, a number of faculty whom I have been collaborating with, and some of their students are here as well, none of whom I officially advise, all of whom I'm happy to informally advise to help them become as successful as they can be. I always thought that one advantage I might have in my career, having been a good advisor, is maybe I would be a good mentor to faculty as well. We'll see if that's true, but I certainly enjoy interacting with these set of people and others. So I'm going to wrap up here very quickly. My point was that when you're surrounded by excellent people that you get along with, you shouldn't fear going into the unknown. I've done it a lot of times in my career, and one of the reasons I was happy to come to Northeastern and do something that I'd never done before was I was convinced that there was the excellence already here that I could be surrounded by. So I don't fear jumping into the unknown. And as I said, you can learn as much from negative examples as you can from positive examples in your life. But as Anin said in his intro, for me, it's always been about family. So here's a picture of my mom and dad in the 60s, dressed to go to Mass on Sunday. And they brought into the world 11 wonderful individuals that I can call my siblings. I'm the 12th. I'm the 10th of those 12, but I'm not the wonderful individual. I'm trying to be modest, but it's not working. This is the last picture I have. My fourth oldest brother was unfortunately killed in an accident a few years ago. So this is one of the last pictures I have of all of my brothers and sisters. And this is an example of a family wedding. These are all, my brothers and sisters, their spouses, and their children. No other hangers on there. No friends that we pulled off the street. That's it. I have my own family. My wife, Megan, who is an amazing individual, who is my rock and is the one person who really gets me and knows how to tell me when I'm doing things wrong and knows how to pick me up. And I'm forever grateful, Megan, for everything you do in my life. And we've been married for 32 years next month. My three wonderful kids, Aiden, who is now 26, Blaze, who's 23, and Mary Catherine, who just finished her first year here in health sciences at Northeastern. This was a picture a few years ago. The thing I love about my kids is that is not faked, right? That's not just posing for a picture. Those three really get along really nice, and it makes me as a father feel very proud. And this was a year ago at Mary Catherine's high school graduation. But I am a better person because of my wife and because of my kids. And particularly Aiden and Blaze, if you're listening, many people view individuals with autism as a burden. Those two are an inspiration and have made me a better person, better researcher, better father, better person. But I want to make two final observations. Growth. Families grow, right? So there's my mom and dad going to Mass. And because they went to Mass every Sunday, this is what resulted from that. And then by about 2010, there's the family. So in the span of 60 years, you go from 2 people to 58. It's pretty good growth, pretty good growth. However, this is me when I got my DPhil at Oxford. By 2014, when I turned 50, my students gave me this beautiful poster that listed my academic family, which at that time numbered 50. So 50 at 50. Go forward to 2023, as Anin said, if you count all of my PhD students, their PhD students, and some of them count their postdocs as well, that's fine, and on and on and on and on. That's the generational count. 187 have received their PhD, but within 5 years, given the normal gestational period of a PhD, the academic family is due to double. Right? There's 170 that are soon to be PhD students. So the academic families grow much faster. So kids, get a PhD, have PhD students. That's enough, okay? Let other people know. And there's a picture a couple years ago. They always celebrate my birthday. And this was celebrating my birthday in Atlanta a couple years ago. One last point I want to make is that it's not just about numbers, quantity. It's quality as well. So these 3 individuals, one of whom is sitting right here in the front, Megan Hoffman, a new faculty member here at Northeastern. These were the CHI Conference 2023 Doctoral Dissertation Award winners. And they have one very interesting thing in common besides the fact that they all won that award. And that interesting thing that they have in common is that they are all my academic grandchildren. Well, grandchild, great-grandchildren, and in the end, he's not listening, there are great-great-grandchildren. There's even a great-great-great-great-grandchild. So I'm going to stop there and just point out that I have received so much more in my life from my academic family than I ever gave them, and I will never forget that. It's the reason I won this award. I know that. Thank you very much.